You have spent the entire summer carrying grain into a communal storehouse. 200 baskets, each one heavy enough to leave a red groove across your shoulders. The grain belongs to dozens of families, so you are not allowed to take any of it home. Instead, the man who controls the storehouse makes you a promise. When winter comes, your family will receive enough grain to survive. Then one evening, he collapses beside the doorway. He is burning with fever. By morning, he may be dead. There is no contract, no receipt, no coin in your hand. The work you performed has already disappeared into the building. You cannot remove your hours from its walls. You cannot carry the summer back out on your shoulders. And if the only person who remembers your reward dies tonight, how do you prove that the village owes you anything? This is the problem that eventually created money, not the problem of buying something. The problem of making a promise survive. The familiar story begins somewhere else. You have meat. Another person has a stone blade. You want the blade, but the blade maker wants grain. The exchange fails. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. Both people must possess exactly what the other wants at exactly the same time. Barter is inconvenient. So humans choose a universal middle object. You exchange meat for money, then money for the blade. It is a clean story. It is also probably wrong. In 1985, anthropologist Caroline Humphrey examined the ethnographic evidence behind the idea that pure barter came first and money came later. She did not argue that barter never existed. Humans have always exchanged things directly, but she found no documented society whose ordinary internal life worked. Like the textbook sequence everyone barters, barter becomes annoying, and the community gradually selects one convenient object to become money. Barter often appears under special conditions. It can happen between strangers, between separate communities, or after a monetary system has broken down. But inside a small community, daily exchange may be held together by something less precise and more powerful. Relationships. Imagine living in a prehistoric camp where almost everyone is connected to you. The woman drying berries is your aunt. The man shaping a stone blade helped carry your brother home after a hunting injury. The family sleeping near the river cared for your child during a fever. You do not begin each morning by pricing every act of cooperation. When a hunter returns with more meat than his household can eat, he shares some. When his next hunt fails, someone else feeds him. No one must calculate whether one strip of meat equals exactly 3 handfuls of roots. The account can remain open. Food today, help tomorrow, protection next season, care during an injury, a place beside the fire when your shelter collapses. Before humans stored accounts in objects, they stored them inside one another. The community remembered who shared. It remembered who helped. It also remembered who disappeared whenever work began and returned whenever food was served. This system was vague. That was not always a weakness. Prehistoric life was unpredictable. A person with a broken leg could not immediately repay the food, keeping him alive. A strict exchange might abandon him. A relationship could tolerate imbalance. Months later, the same person might repair your shelter, reveal the location of water, or risk his life to protect your child. Barter requires 2 objects to meet. Reciprocity allows 2 moments in time to meet. In 1971, evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers proposed reciprocal altruism as one explanation for how cooperation between non-relatives could evolve. Helping another person can benefit the giver over time. When people meet, repeatedly recognize one another and have opportunities to return assistance. But reciprocity creates a dangerous opportunity: cheating. If everyone shares, someone who constantly takes and never gives can benefit at least for a while. So cooperation requires more than generosity. It requires social accounting. Who helped? Who refused? Who deserves another chance? Who has already received too many? Gratitude encourages repayment. Guilt follows a failure to return help. Anger responds to exploitation. Suspicion protects against repeat cheaters. Forgiveness allows valuable relationships to survive occasional mistakes. Long before money existed, the human mind was already keeping a rough ledger. That ledger still operates today. A friend pays for dinner. You say, "I'll get the next one." Nothing is written down. No interest rate is discussed. Yet both of you remember. If the same friend pays 10 times and you never offer the unpaid meals, begin to mean more than their price. They become evidence about your character. Inside a small group, reputation functions almost like credit. A person known for generosity can receive help before offering repayment. A known cheat may be required to provide something immediately. The trustworthy person can survive a shortage because others believe the future version of that person will repay the present debt. But this kind of credit has a severe limit. It works only where people know you. Leave the camp and much of your social wealth disappears. A stranger does not know that you shared meat last winter. They do not know that you cared for 3 injured hunters. They do not know that 20 families would trust you with their children. All the value stored in your reputation becomes useless the moment you enter a community that cannot remember your past. Money would eventually allow trust to travel farther than reputation. But first, humans needed to make invisible meaning portable. At Bismoon Cave in southwest Morocco, archaeologists recovered 33 perforated seashells from Middle Stone Age deposits. Many came from layers dating to at least 142000 years ago. The shells had been deliberately altered. Some showed wear from being suspended, and traces of red ochre appeared on several examples. They were probably worn as ornaments. They were not money. There is no evidence that someone at Bismoon could purchase food with a bead. But the shells reveal a mental ability without which money could never exist. A small object could communicate identity, affiliation, status, or belonging. Its social meaning could become larger than its physical material. To another person, it might say, "I belong to this group. I hold this position. I am connected to these people." A portable object could carry information beyond the body of its owner. That is the mental trick beneath every form of money. A banknote is not valuable because its paper is unusually useful. A number in a banking application cannot feed you. A coin cannot protect you from winter. Money works because people can look at an object, mark, or number and agree that it represents something absent. Food not yet harvested, labor already completed, a debt owed by someone who is not present, the right to request resources from a stranger. Symbolic thinking allowed meaning to separate from material. But a bead can tell people who you are. It does not automatically tell them how much grain you are owed. For that, human beings needed to make quantity portable too. In 1969, Denise Schmandt-Besserat began a project on the earliest uses of clay in the Middle East. She was not trying to solve the origin of money. She wanted to understand what humans had done with clay before pottery became common. So she began visiting museum collections. Again and again, among the pots, tablets, figurines, and bricks, she encountered tiny clay objects. Cones no larger than a fingertip, spheres, discs, cylinders, tetrahedrons, ovoids. They were often mentioned briefly in excavation reports, placed into broad categories, or treated as objects of uncertain purpose. Some had been called toys, others gaming pieces. Many had simply been catalogued and forgotten. But as Schmandt-Besserat moved from one collection to another, the same shapes kept returning. Not in one settlement, across the ancient Near East, not from one brief period, across thousands of years. She began gathering the records. One museum drawer led to another. One excavation report pointed toward dozens more. The objects that looked meaningless in isolation began to form a system when placed beside one another. The shapes repeated too often to be accidental, and their appearance coincided with farming, stored goods, and increasingly complex administration. Schmandt-Besserat compared the clay forms with impressions on sealed containers and with signs appearing in early writing. She argued that many were accounting tokens. A cone could represent a measure of grain. A sphere could stand for another quantity or product. An ovoid might represent a jar of oil. Instead of remembering 10 measures of grain, an administrator could collect 10 corresponding counters. The clay did not contain the grain. It contained information about the grain. Schmandt-Besserat eventually examined thousands of these objects. Her interpretation transformed pieces that had sat quietly in museum storage into evidence for an information system thousands of years older than writing. Not every part of her theory is accepted without debate. Later researchers have questioned whether every small clay object was an accounting token and whether tokens developed into writing through one clean universal sequence. But the larger transformation is difficult to miss. Tiny objects that archaeologists once struggled to explain were fragments of an ancient attempt to move memory into matter. One of the clearest collections came from Ain Ghazal, a Neolithic settlement near modern Amman in Jordan. Archaeologists recovered 137 small clay and stone tokens from levels dated to roughly 7,250 to 6,500 BCE. About 2/3 were spherical or hemispherical. Others included cones, discs, ovoids, a cylinder, and a crescent. Researchers have interpreted several common forms as counters associated with cereal products. Imagine holding one. No precious metal, no portrait of a ruler, no writing, just a small piece of shaped clay. Yet it could perform something the human brain could not do reliably. It could remain the same after an argument. It could pass from one administrator to another. It could survive while its creator slept, traveled, lied, forgot, or died. The account could sit on a floor, rest inside a container, wait for winter, return to the worker at the storehouse. At first, his claim exists only inside the supervisor's mind. The worker carried the grain. The supervisor promised repayment. Then a token is created. Now a third person can inspect evidence of the obligation. The promise has left the two people who made it. It has entered the physical world. This does not mean every token was money. A counter tied to one storehouse may not circulate through a wider community. It may represent only a particular commodity inside a specific administrative system. But one of money's central functions has appeared: external memory. The token remembers so that a person does not have to. Then the accounting system encountered another problem. Loose tokens could be lost, removed, added, or secretly rearranged. One solution was to place them inside hollow clay envelopes, often called bullae, and seal the surface. But this created an almost comic inconvenience. Once the envelope was closed, no one could see what was inside without breaking it. So accountants pressed the tokens into the wet exterior before sealing them within. The outside displayed the shapes and quantities hidden inside. The account now existed twice, as objects within the envelope, and as impressions on its surface. Eventually, the impressions could perform the work without the original counters. The three-dimensional token became a two-dimensional sign. A cone no longer had to be present. Its mark could stand for it, and the mark could stand for the grain. The object was beginning to disappear. Only the information needed to remain. This pattern would repeat throughout the history of money. Goods became tokens. Tokens became marks. Marks became written accounts. Written accounts became electronic records. The physical container kept changing. The claim survived. By around 3,300 BCE, when some tokens were being enclosed and impressed in Mesopotamia, human beings were no longer merely counting objects. They were learning to create durable signs for absent things. A mark could represent an object that was not there. A record could preserve a transaction after everyone involved had left the room. The same cognitive ability that once allowed a shell bead to carry identity was now allowing clay to carry debt. By the late 4th millennium BCE, this transformation had reached a new scale at Uruk in southern Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq. Around 3200 BCE, Uruk had become one of the largest settlements in the world. Its institutions managed barley, beer, animals, textiles, land, labor, and rations on a scale no small camp could handle through reputation alone. Thousands of people could not all know one another. Workers could not depend on every administrator personally remembering their contribution. The city needed a memory larger than any living brain. Around 3,300 BCE marks began appearing on clay tablets in southern Mesopotamia. The earliest surviving examples were not epic poetry. They were not love letters. They were not philosophical reflections on death. They were accounts, quantities, commodities, rations, deliveries. About 6,000 proto-cuneiform tablets containing more than 38,000 lines are known from areas connected with the Uruk cultural world. One tablet, probably from Uruk and dated to approximately 3,100 to 2,900 BCE, records the distribution of barley. A cylinder seal rolled across its surface left the image of a male figure hunting dogs and wild boars. The picture is dramatic. The written information is almost painfully practical. Someone needed to know where the grain went. This changes how we imagine the invention of writing. Writing did not appear only because humans had beautiful stories they wanted to preserve. It also emerged because large societies needed durable records. Before a city could preserve its myths, it had to manage its rations. Suppose you work for a temple estate. You are not paid every hour. Your labor is recorded. Later, another person distributes grain according to the account. That person does not need to have watched you work. They need to trust the tablet. In a small camp, repayment depends on personal memory. At Uruk, it can depend on institutional memory. You are no longer owed only by a particular human being. You are owed by a system. Institutional memory allowed strangers to cooperate. It also created a new form of power. The institution controlled the record. If the tablet recognized your work, you could receive grain. If the tablet omitted you, your labor might disappear. Once society moved memory outside the mind, whoever controlled that external memory gained influence over reality. The same technology that protected your claim could record your tax. The same ledger that proved what you were owed could calculate what you owed. Money did not develop only as a friendly convenience between traders. It also grew beside administration, tribute, rent, wages, and political authority, and there still did not need to be a coin. In ancient Mesopotamia, barley and silver could perform different monetary functions. Barley could be distributed as rations. Silver could provide a common unit for calculating value. The shekel began as a unit of weight, not as a stamped coin identical to a modern currency bearing that name. An agreement could express a debt in shekels of silver even when no coin changed hands. The unit allowed unlike things to be compared. Grain, wool, oil, animals, labor, land. A sheep does not physically contain a month of work. A field does not naturally contain a quantity of silver. Yet a shared unit places them on one invisible scale. Once value becomes a unit, the valued object does not need to be present. You can price grain that has not grown. Record payment for work that has not started. Promise resources to be delivered after the harvest. Inherit a debt created before you were born. Money allows future goods to influence present behavior. You work now. You receive later. A unit of account creates a bridge through time. But an account trapped inside one institution has limited reach. What happens when you travel? What happens when you deal with a stranger who cannot read your city's records? What happens when no common administrator is present? Now value needs a portable body. Different societies used livestock, grain, cloth, shells, and metal. Not every valuable object became money, and not every form of money performed the same functions. But useful monetary objects tended to survive storage, travel easily, and remain recognizable. Metal offered another advantage. It could be melted and reshaped. It also created a problem. Two pieces might look similar, while containing different amounts. One might be mixed with cheaper material. Every transaction could require weighing and inspection. Long before stamped coins became common, some prehistoric communities produced metal objects in repeated forms and approximate weights. In 2021, archaeologists Maikel, Kuijpers, and Cătălin Popa analyzed 5028 bronze rings, ribs, and axe blades from early Bronze Age Central Europe. They asked an unusual question, not whether every object had exactly the same mass, whether a human hand could perceive the difference. Ancient people did not carry laboratory scales. They lifted objects, compared them, judged them through muscle and touch. Kuijpers and Popa found that about 70% of the rings fell within a range that would probably have felt equivalent to a ring weighing roughly 195.5 grams. Some rings and ribs appeared together in bundles or hordes, suggesting that at least some could be treated as interchangeable stores of metal. This gives us a scene few modern people associate with the invention of money. No king, no market stall. Only a person lifting a bronze ring, feeling its weight, recognizing the form, thinking, I know what this is, and I believe someone else will know too. That final belief is the engine of money. You do not accept a monetary object only because you want it. You accept it because you expect someone else to accept it later. That person accepts it because they expect another person after them to do the same. Money is a chain of predictions about other human minds. Food has direct value. You can eat it even if everyone else rejects it. A bronze ring used as money has partly social value. Its power depends on a network of expectation. As that network grows, personal trust becomes less important. You no longer need to know the previous owner. You need confidence in the object, its weight, its shape, its material, or eventually the authority stamped onto it. The first widely recognized coins appeared in Lydia and neighboring parts of western Anatolia during the 7th century BCE. They were made from electrum, a mixture of gold and silver that occurred naturally in local rivers and could also be adjusted by metalworkers. An electrum coin from Sardis has been dated to approximately 635 to 585 BCE. These early pieces were stamped with designs. The coin did not invent exchange. It did not invent debt. It did not invent metal money. It did not invent standardized weight. What it did was compress several verification problems into one object. Before coinage, you might receive a piece of metal and ask, how heavy is it? What is it made from? Has it been diluted? Will another person trust it? A stamp offered a partial answer. It announced that an issuing authority stood behind the piece. You still needed trust, but you no longer needed to trust only the stranger handing you the metal. You could trust or be forced to accept the institution represented by the mark. Later, during the reign of Croesus of Lydia, around 560 to 546 BCE, separate gold and silver coinage became associated with Sardis. The material became more predictable. The authority became more visible. Money and political power became increasingly difficult to separate. A ruler could issue coins, pay soldiers, purchase supplies, collect taxes. And if taxes had to be paid in an accepted currency, people needed to obtain that currency. The state did not merely guarantee the token. It could help create demand for it. A coin was portable trust. It was also portable authority. Now return to the prehistoric camp. You share meat with another hunter. He owes you, but the obligation is trapped inside your relationship. You cannot walk into another camp point at a stranger and say, "I fed my friend last winter, so now you must give me a blanket." Money breaks that boundary. You perform labor for one person. You receive a recognized claim. You transfer that claim to someone completely different. The second person gives you food because they expect a third person to accept the same claim later. A personal debt has become transferable. Instead of one person owing you one favor, you hold something that an entire network may recognize. This is why money feels like stored possibility. A coin does not promise one specific object. It preserves choice. Food if you become hungry. Shelter if the weather changes. Tools if work appears. Medicine if someone becomes ill. The object may be small, but your brain reads it as options, as safety, as survival deferred. Money gains flexibility by deleting information. A gift remembers a relationship. Money remembers only the claim. If your sister feeds you after an injury, the act contains affection, history, and obligation. If an employer pays you for 8 hours of labor, the payment does not need to remember whether the work injured you, whether you were respected, or whether you missed time with your children. The account records that a measured obligation has been settled. Money is powerful because it compresses social memory. Compression makes information portable. It also removes context. In 1998, economist Narayana Kocherlakota published a paper titled "Money is Memory." He was constructing a formal economic model, not describing a prehistoric excavation. But the central insight illuminates the entire history. In a society with a complete and reliable public record of everyone's past actions, shared memory could perform many of the functions money performs. The system would know who had contributed, who had consumed, and who still possessed a claim. But complete social memory does not exist. Human beings forget. Records remain incomplete. Strangers meet without knowing one another's histories. Money serves as a primitive substitute. It does not preserve the full story of how you acquired it. It carries only the recognized claim. A clay token cannot remember your generosity, but it can preserve a quantity. A tablet cannot feel gratitude, but it can outlive the person who wrote it. A coin cannot tell whether you earned it honestly, but it can move through a crowd of strangers. At every stage, humans gained scale by sacrificing context. That trade-off allowed cooperation to move beyond kinship. It also created a danger. Once everything can be translated into one unit, humans may begin to confuse what has a price with what has value. The prehistoric mind did not evolve around bank balances. It evolved around food status safety, reciprocity, family, and belonging. Money entered those ancient psychological systems and gave them a number. More money can mean more protection, more influence, greater freedom from dependence, a stronger ability to help others, or a stronger ability to control them. The form of money is cultural. The emotions attached to it are much older, and traces of money's older forms are still hiding inside the language you use. The English word pecuniary, meaning related to money, comes from the Latin pecunia, meaning money or property. That word is related to pecus, the Latin word for cattle. The history is buried inside the vocabulary. To speak about a pecuniary loss is to use a word shaped by a world in which wealth could breathe, eat, reproduce, and wander away. Another fossil sits inside the British pound sign, pound. The symbol developed from the letter L, the first letter of the Latin libra, a unit of weight. A modern currency symbol still carries the memory of a scale. These are not proof that all money began as cattle or metal by weight. Human societies developed many different monetary systems, but the words preserve an older intuition. Before money became a number on a screen, wealth often had a body. It stood in a field, it filled a granary, it rested on a scale. Money did not erase those earlier forms, it compressed them. So who invented it? No one. And many people, small communities developed reciprocity and reputation. Symbolic objects allowed meaning to travel. Farmers used counters to track goods. Scribes moved quantities onto tablets. Institutions measured value through grain and silver. Metal workers created recognizable forms. Rulers stamped authority onto portable pieces. Money is not one invention. It is a stack of inventions. Memory, measurement, symbolism, trust, transferability, standardization, authority. The barter story sees money mainly as a solution for inconvenient shopping. But shopping is only the surface. The deeper problem is time. You give now, you receive later. The deeper problem is distance. You contribute here. You claim value somewhere else. The deeper problem is scale. You cooperate with people whose names you will never know. And the deepest problem is trust. How do you convince a stranger that an absent community owes you something? Now return to the storehouse. You have carried 200 baskets of grain. Winter is 6 months away. The man who promised your share is dying. But this time, your work is not stored only in his mind. Beside the sealed doorway lies a collection of clay counters. Or perhaps someone has pressed marks into a wet tablet. Your entire story is not recorded. The aching in your back is not recorded. The evenings you missed with your children are not recorded. The promise spoken beside the field is not recorded. But the claim survives. Another administrator can inspect it. Someone who never watched you work can recognize it. The village can repay you after the original witness is dead. That piece of clay is not yet a modern coin. But psychologically, something enormous has happened. Trust has acquired a body. Debt has acquired a shape. Memory has learned to survive its owner. Thousands of years later, clay becomes metal. Metal becomes paper. Paper becomes a number glowing on a screen. You perform labor. A system changes a record. Later, a stranger gives you food because another system confirms that record. The original exchange is gone. Only the claim continues moving. The first money was not a coin. It was not a banknote. It was not even necessarily an object. It began when one human gave something valuable and another remembered that something must return. Money appeared when that memory became too important to leave inside the human mind. So we placed it into shells, tokens, weights, tablets, coins, and finally numbers. Humans did not invent money simply because barter was inconvenient. We invented it because promises needed to travel farther than reputation, last longer than memory, and survive the death of the people who made them. The first money was a promise. The true invention was teaching that promise how to outlive us.